Welcome, everyone, to the Legendary Strength Podcast. I have on the line here my good friend Tyler Bramlett, who has been a guest once or twice before. Forget how many times. He's a real good friend of mine, and our training is very similar in so many ways. So and I know a lot of people have found our websites through each other, and, you know, we're just always pushing the levels of what people can do and just help people in a whole lot of different ways. So thanks, Tyler, for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on the call again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We also had some fun yesterday. I set a new record in the wrestler's bridge with Tyler's help of over 800 pounds, so that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was pretty wild, man. I definitely think the same way as you when it comes to training, but I don't know about on my own training schedule. I'm really more just kind of like stay fit to play nowadays.
Yeah, well, you got a baby, I don't, so I'm sure that changes things to some degree.
Yeah, you know, babies, injuries, life,
schedules,
they all get the best of you one way or another. So, you know, I'm about looking good, feeling good, performing good, you know, that's what I'm about these days. So.
Yeah, it is a pretty big difference between, you know, continually pushing the levels of what you can do, and you still got to do that to some degree, but you can just be generally a lot better than people as far as like movement quality and quantity, and you really don't have to take it to extremes.
Well, yeah, that's the key, man. Like, I mean, how many people do you know can do, you know, 5 strict muscle-ups in a row and, you know, handstand push-ups and the teens of reps and so on and so forth. I mean, that's where I want to stay. I want to get there or maybe improve a little bit on it, and I want to stay there until I'm, you know, 60 years old. I want to be able to press heavy dumbbells overhead and stuff. But the reality, like you just said, is most people, they get married to this kind of beginner mindset, or they don't believe that they can get past a certain exercise, and that's where I like to come in with all my clients and teach them just these really solid progressions so that they don't have to worry about the next step. They just focus on the step that they're at, and once they master it, then they can go on to exercises. And the cool thing about that is over time, you eventually get to the point where you're doing things that you would have considered were impossible for you to be able to do. So, you know, that's what I'm all about these days, just teaching people how to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say is what stops people from, you know, really attaining these things that in their eyes may be elite, but really aren't that hard to actually attain if you're willing to, you know, put in some time and effort for it?
Well, Logan, there's 2 things that stop people from being able to do that. And the reason why I know these things is because I've trained many clients and lots of personal clients as well that I've spent a lot of time with. And what I see that prevents people from taking that next step is, A, building a strong foundation on the basics. And this is so important because, you know, I'm a classic person where I'll watch like or I'll read a workout book or something like that, and the first thing I'll do is open to the advanced section. You know what I mean, right? Like, I know there's probably a lot of people, you have a lot more advanced people in your community, so there's probably a lot of people listening to this right now that are naturally inclined to open up to the advanced section and jump right in.
I've never done that myself.
Yeah, right. Without building a strong foundation, right? And so, like, when I look at the way I train somebody, I'm going to build a strong foundation against their will. Like, they want to go to the advanced section, I'm like, no advance. You have to build that strong foundation on the basic movement patterns. You know, so you have to build a strong, and when I say strong, I'm not talking about world-class strength. I'm talking about movement quality, right? I want to look at somebody's squat, deadlift, push-up, row, press, pull-up, right? I want to look at all these movements and make sure that their body is functioning properly. So that means, do they have enough flexibility? Do they have enough strength? Do they have enough or the proper muscle activation sequence? Are they actually firing the right muscles that are going to help them become stronger, look better naked, so on and so forth in the long run? And so that's the number one thing, is people do not build a strong foundation. And then the second component is kind of tied between they don't have the knowledge and they don't believe in themselves, right? And I'll kind of break that down a little bit, because a lot of people don't understand what it takes to go, you know, from a kneeling push-up to a handstand push-up would be a simple example, right? Mm-hmm. You see somebody rep out 10 handstand push-ups, and 9 out of 10 people are going to probably 99 out of 100 people are going to look at that and say, oh, that's freaking impossible. But you and I both know that pretty much anybody, even into their 40s, 50s, 60s, can probably work up to being able to do handstand push-ups, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, that's not unreasonable. I have a 52-year-old woman who's doing face-to-wall handstands for time right now. And how did we start out? Well, we started out with a kneeling plank, right, which she could barely hold, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, to me, like that progressive, that pathway, the roadmap is the key to really getting to that point where you can do things that you might have considered impossible in the past. And like, so, with that face-the-wall handstand, let's just take a simple example there. I started her with a kneeling plank. When she could hold a kneeling plank for several sets of 60 seconds with good posture, good alignment, then I started doing regular planks. We started doing regular planks with the same time limit. Then we started doing planks with her elbows on a Swiss ball, but her arms are still at 90 degrees so that you're getting more core activation. Then I started doing some sort of shoulder packing leg raise sequence. So we were doing a lot more core work as well at the same time. And then I started just walking her feet up the wall. So all I would have her do is put her hands, 5 feet away from the wall, take a step up and hold a plank where her body's slightly inverted and hold that position for 30 to 60 seconds. And then, maybe a week or two later, we'd scoot her hands back about 4 to 6 inches and keep repeating. And then she built the strength from doing that to be able to do nearly a perfect face-the-wall handstand. She's still about a foot or so away from the wall, but for somebody who was 220 pounds when they came to me and over 50 years old and feeling really hopeless, now to be able to do handstand-type movements, that's a miraculous change for her. And she would have looked at herself now and said, that's never going to happen. But if you have the roadmap, it will happen. And then the second component of that, what I was talking about, was the belief, Logan. You know all about this mental side of training.
Oh, yeah.
Is that people look at it and they say to themselves, I will never be able to do that. That is impossible for me. And if you're listening to this right now, I urge you to never think that. Never think that something like that is impossible. Get that out of your mind, because that's self-limiting thoughts. That's going to keep you from growing stronger. That's going to keep you from becoming a greater version of you, right? And that's what I really want you guys to realize, because I have people come to me all the time, and I say, okay, guess what? We're going to change your body, and we're going to focus on performance. And so when we can squat 225 pounds for 10 reps, when you can do 15 pull-ups, and when we can do 30 push-ups, you're going to see a dramatic transformation in your body. And they look at me and say, I can't even do one push-up. But a year later, they're doing all 3 of those things perfectly. And so, I think that the roadmap, and then really just taking your mind out of the equation and saying, forget about me believing whether I can do that or not. Let's follow the plan. Let's follow the plan, and all I got to do is just beat my last workout. And so who fucking cares if you don't beat your last workout every single time? Sometimes you don't, right? And then all you got to do is go, okay, you know what, I'll cycle back a couple workouts and I'll start from there and build back up. But that consistency and that roadmap and just getting out of your head saying to yourself, I can't do this, you don't even have to manufacture I can do this. All you got to do is focus on beating that last workout and having a good roadmap. And that's what will get you there in the long run. Not a single one of my clients ever had to think to themselves, like, I will be able to, I'm not working on this, psychological side. All I say is, hey, let's just beat the last workout. And that minimizes the goals in your mind. So it allows you to be able to understand that over time you're going to progress. Because all training is adaptation, Logan. All training is adaptation. That's it. People try to give you all these fancy routines and blah, 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 blah. All you're doing is adapting to whatever stimulus you're putting on your body. And so if you progressively make the movements more difficult, like I teach in all my training programs, then what ultimately happens over time is as the workouts change, you change. So I think that's what's holding people back for the most part.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time really going into detail on progression with people, trying to teach them to understand how progression works in many different ways, because I feel if people get that, then truthfully they don't really need a trainer. If you can grasp just how you get from point A to point B and all different ways you can progress in doing that, regardless of what the move or exercise you're trying to do is, if you grasp that, then one, you won't have a problem with that belief, because you can see that, okay, I only need to do these steps in between in order to get there. But it is when people are making that huge leap, like, oh, I'll never be able to do a handstand, because they see no path in order to get there, and that's what progression is all about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Logan. I think you hit it on the head with the trainer thing, because a trainer is there, or a program that you might buy is there because you're trying to learn the proper way to do the movements, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what they're there for. So if you're a total beginner and you're still not learning things properly, you either need a program or you need a trainer to help walk you through these exercises to get kind of the gist on the go form. At least that's the faster path than having to discover it all yourself. Because if you do find a good trainer, somebody who understands movement, they're going to be able to give you that fast track to better success. But if you go to a trainer and they're just doing bodybuilding, freaking heyday, lactic acid beatdowns, I mean, you better hightail it out of there, because you're just going to be wasting your damn money. So I think that there's a purpose for a trainer, and that purpose is to teach you foundational movement. And then from there, like you said, if you really want to take your results into your own hands, understanding progression is the key.
Yeah, and it can be those really like small tips in progression, how you can tweak things that can make a huge difference or something you never thought of before.
Right.
That is sort of the key to unlocking the progression so you can get to the next step. Let me ask you about movement quality. What's that all about?
So me and Logan have had a lot of conversations about movement quality, and ultimately we agree on a lot of things. And so to me, movement quality is this. Movement quality is your body moving properly within the range of biomechanics, okay? So, a simple way to think about this is if I watch somebody squat and their knees are wobbling inward, which means their femur and their tibia aren't in alignment, they have a bend to them, then every time you squat, you're going to be putting stress on your knee joint. That's just a simple fact, right? That's just biomechanics that we understand. And so what I like to do with people is make sure, like, again, those foundational movements are there. And so why the squat? The squat exposes foundational flexibility and muscle activation sequencing that you need to be able to do. And so if you're squatting down and you have full range of motion and your knees are going the same direction as your toes and your feet stay nice and flat on the ground, you're not hunching forward through your shoulders, your chest is still open at the bottom, then guess what? You have good muscle activation sequence and you also have good mobility, flexibility, range of motion. But if you squat and your knees knock into each other and your chest is all hunched forward, then, well, we got a lot of work to do. It could be either flexibility-based or it could be your muscle activation sequence, so your ability to perform that exercise properly. And so typically what I do with my private clients, with my boot camp people, we try to identify which it is, okay? And so we want to test and see, are you flexible enough to do this? And so we might put them in a position that they are flexible enough to do this position. So an example would be like the squat. I might have them lie down on their back, I'll grab onto both their feet, and I'll just push their knees up into their chest, right? Just to see if they were lying on their back and they weren't doing any of the work themselves, do they have the mobility to do this exercise? And so if they don't, then we're going to want to look at it and say, hey, do we need to stretch the groin? Do we need to stretch the hamstring? Do we need to stretch the glute? Do we need to stretch the ankle? Do we need to stretch the shoulders, right? So that's when you can identify whether something is a mobility issue or is a stability or muscle firing issue. And if they can do it, then you know it's a muscle firing issue. And so you have to stand them up and you have to teach them how to squat with good form. Now, the reason why this is so important is because we have to build a strong foundation, like I said. If you build a strong foundation of movement, on like those basic movements, like I said, putting your arms overhead, pulling your arms from overhead downward, the presses and the rows, the core stability stuff, and then the squats and the hip hinge stuff, if you build that strong foundation, it will carry into every other exercise. But if you skip, let's say you're just getting started, or even you're more advanced and you're doing like deadlifts and stuff like that, and you got a pretty decent deadlift, well, you don't want to skip ahead to one-arm snatches, right? You don't want to skip ahead to a more complex exercise until you've really mastered that basic exercise. And that's just movement complexity. And to me, if you can increase movement complexity over a long period of time, you're going to see amazing results. That's the same thing we talked about with progression. And so let me kind of take a flip side on this. I know I'm kind of talking real fast like an auctioneer on crack, but that's how I talk because I get all excited about this stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, right. So movement quality definitely needs to be there, and like I said, that depends on whether or not you have a range of motion to go into proper exercises, and then you could do them with good form, otherwise known as you're firing the proper muscles. Okay, and so
can I ask you a question on that before you move on?
Yeah, go for it.
So if let's say someone doesn't have what you deem as a good movement quality, how are you correcting that specifically? Are you just doing like I'm doing finger quotes in the air, like corrective exercises, or are you doing regressions of the exercises in order to get them? What's your approach to that?
Sure,
or does it depend on what the problem is?
Yeah, okay, so obviously it's going to depend on what the problem is, right? And so when you're saying that, are you talking about flexibility or are you talking about muscle activation?
Let's go with muscle activation.
Okay, so muscle activation. Let's go back to the squat because everybody can visualize the squat in their mind right now. So somebody's squatting down and their shoulders are rounding forward and their knees are knocking in. I go, okay, let me test your mobility. I lay them down on their back. I push their knees up into their chest. Their back stays flat on the ground. Their knees come up nice and high. I go, okay, let's get back up. It's a muscle activation issue. So I'll have them do a couple squats. I'll pick the number one flaw. This is the biggest problem that most trainers and most athletes have is they try to do too many things at once, right? So I will pick the number one flaw in that movement. So if it's knees knocking together, then I'm going to work on the knees. If it's shoulders hunching forward and rounding at the bottom, then I'm going to work on the shoulders, right? But I'm only going to focus on one thing at a time until it becomes an automatic function, right? Until I've strengthened their nerves to the point where that's their new squat. Because I've found in my training over the last few years, if I give somebody more than one thing to do at a time, they fail. right? Or they do it for a short period of time, and then they fail. So I'm not really a big fan of doing like dramatic, huge changes. What I am a big fan of is constantly making small tweaks to correct their movement patterns, okay? And so, if, for example, with a squat, let's say the knees are the biggest issue. One of the easiest things to do is either sit down on the ground and push inwardly on the knees, so they have to be forced to push out. That'll fire those muscles on the outsides of the hips that stabilize the knee joint and externally rotate the femur. That's what we want in the squat. Or I'll use a pair of bands and do that same thing. And let's just say it's one knee. Well, then I'll just focus on one knee. And so this technique is basically called feed the flaw. So if somebody has a flaw in their movement, if their shoulders are rounded forward, if their knees are wobbling in, instead of like bringing their knee back out for them, you want to push in on the flaw. Not super hard, you want to ease into it, but push in on the flaw so they push back against you to the point where they're in proper alignment. If you do enough reps like this, then you're going to see somebody's squat naturally change. And the cool thing about this too is you don't have to tell somebody. You can verbalize it, you can display it for them, but this is an intrinsic way to learn how to do a new squat. And once you do, 100, 500, 1,000, it depends on who you are and what type of activities you've done in the past to give you this dysfunction. Once you do a certain amount of reps, all of a sudden that becomes your new squat. And that's what I really like. We call that neural reconditioning, where your brain works differently in connection with your movement. So people stop rounding their backs to pick up their purse off the ground. People stop wobbling their knees in when they're walking, when they're squatting, when they're lunging, right? And so that would be an example of how I would fix that particular issue.
Okay, excellent. And what if it was a flexibility issue?
Typically with flexibility issues, I just go with a standby of range of motion, okay? So, a squat, for example, let's say they go about halfway down, their legs are still about 45 degrees relative to the ground. They go about halfway down, and they start to round their back, and their knees wobble in and whatnot. And it's a flexibility issue. I test them, and I'm, okay, it's hamstrings, it's groin, it's ankles or shoulders or whatever it might be, right? I will typically do a hybrid of two things. I'll reduce the range of motion that they do have good form on, right? So I'll put a box behind their ass, and we'll have them squat to that box for a week or two, and then I'll take anywhere between 1 to 4 inches off, and I'll have them squat to that box for a week or two. And over the course of usually about 16 weeks, I can get somebody from a fairly poor squat to a fairly deep squat using range of motion, just like that. And, I mean, I swear to God, like, people underestimate how powerful that can be. Like, I know you got a lot of people probably interested in, like, the one-legged squat. Well, like, the single best way, I think, to get somebody a one-legged squat is just to do a one-legged box squat.
So I got there.
Yeah, you start at 24 inches, and you just lower it like 1 inch a week. And people don't want to do that for 16 weeks that it would take to get down to like a legitimate one-legged squat. But I've done that with my private clients too, along with some other tricks just to make sure their muscles are activating properly. But, I mean, generally speaking, just reducing range of motion to the range of motion that they can have perfect form in. And then over the course of several weeks, just increasing that range of motion a little bit. And the only supplemental thing I would do to accelerate that a little bit further is some stretching. So I would have them do some specific stretching either at home, or I would bring them in there and I would actually stretch them. And like I said, for the squat, it's always going to be hamstring, groin, glutes, ankles, or shoulders. And, literally if I narrowed it down to 2, it's probably going to be ankles and hamstrings. So I would just literally hammer those things. And I've seen people go from, if you could imagine somebody lying on their back as if they're in a bed, and I'm lifting their leg up, right? I have seen people go from the point where I can only lift their leg to a 45-degree angle to where I can lift their leg to 100 degrees and beyond within 6 months, right? And so the cool thing about that is not only can you just all of a sudden squat again because you have hamstring mobility, but the likelihood of you injuring your back is going to go way down because you're not going to be humping through your back because your hamstrings are locking your pelvis in place. So I know this might sound like kind of advanced to everybody, but it really boils down to if you want more flexibility, find the actual muscle that's tight and work on that one, and then work through the ranges of motion that you do have good form on, and then just slowly increase it over time. And one side note, Logan, I forgot to kind of answer. You said, do you do corrective exercise, functional this, functional that? Man, I've dabbled with a lot of physical therapy-esque corrective exercise, yada, 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 yada. What ultimately I come back to every time is nothing relates to nothing else, right? It does, but it doesn't. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but like basically what I'm saying is if you have a fucked up squat and your knees are wobbling in on every rep, I can fix that squat by having you do squats. But if I do some like hip wall thing, whatever weirdo, the only reason I would ever do that is because you cannot physically fire that muscle. That is the only reason that is applicable. And that's what physical therapist's job is. Somebody gets a surgery, they get their leg up in a sling for 6 months or whatever, they come out of it, and they can't fire their quad anymore. Well, yeah, you're going to need somebody to help you to fire that quad again so that you can walk, squat, lunge, so on and so forth again, which are just basic movement patterns, right? But generally speaking, if somebody has shitty movement, all we do is we work on the movements that are shitty. You don't have to make this complex. You don't have to do, like, chops and lifts and blah, 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 blah. Let's just focus on the basics that I said, and then let's just focus on making those basics more complex over time. Because if you do that, your muscles are going to take care of themselves.
Yeah, I really like that explanation, because one thing I'm sort of more of a dawning of realization is one form of progression can just be from poor form in a movement up to good form, and this can be with basic movement patterns like you're talking about, like the squat, or advanced movements like a front lever. For example, the first time you attain anything, the first time you're ever able to achieve a skill, for instance, let's say when I did the tiger bend, ugly as sin. It looked really bad. There's I used some kip in the legs, but I accomplished it. And as a form of progression, instead of just adding reps or somehow adding load to it, if you clean that up, that right there is a form of progression. So what you've been talking about is really applying it to those basic movement patterns, which is something you absolutely want to achieve. So you have great basic human movement, but these same sort of things also apply to more advanced stuff. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. It's so interesting too. I'll just give one quick example of my one of the exercises I use on all my clients. Everybody does a one-legged deadlift, right? Because to me, a one-legged deadlift is a great example of whether or not you can stabilize on one leg. Why do I care so much about that? Because every fucking step you take is on one leg, right? And if you see somebody who has a crappy walk, ask them to stand on one leg and tap their shin with their hands and stand back up with good form. It's never going to happen, right? And even worse, I have a marathon runner that I worked with for over a year, and it took me about 18 months to get her to properly do a one-legged deadlift to the point where I could call it good form. By no means perfect form whatsoever, right? And I just feel like that's just one of those foundational movements. And, people will have a dysfunction in their muscle firing, or they'll have a dysfunction in their flexibility. And oftentimes, no matter what, if people aren't acclimated to that exercise, it takes me between 6 and 12 months to get them to do a perfect one-legged deadlift. Where I feel like, okay, I shouldn't say perfect, where I feel like, okay, I trust you to add resistance to this, or I trust you to make the movement more complex. And so just like you're saying, yeah, if you're at an exercise and it's like a new progression to you, you haven't ever done it before, then part of that progression is just making sure that you got better at it. It looked better. It felt better. You were firing the proper muscles. You were going through the real range of motion. Because there's so many ways to progress. And that's, I think, where people get confused, Logan, is people it's really easy when you're opening the bodybuilding magazines to say, okay, this week you're going to do 3 sets of 10 with this weight. And the next week you're going to do 3 sets of 12 with the same weight. And then the week after that we're going to add 5 pounds and we're going to go 3 sets of 8. All right, that's really easy to understand. But progressive movement is hard for most people to understand. But, again, it's simply because they don't have a roadmap. They don't know what the next step is, right? And so that's what I try to do with everybody, is I try to create this movement matrix, if you will, where it's like, okay, here's where I start, and here's where I want to end up, and here's the roadmap to get from point A to point B. And to be honest, I was on another interview a little while back, and he was asking me, well, most people will never be able to do one-legged squats and handstand push-ups and pull-ups and so on and so forth. And I was like, well, I don't really care whether they're going to get to that level. What I care about is that they're moving forward. Right? That's the whole thing. I don't care if you're 70 years old and you're like, oh, crap, I'll never be able to do that stuff. Well, guess what? You could probably go from, a wall push-up to a kneeling push-up to a regular push-up, and you'd still see great results from that. And that removes you having to focus on aesthetic exercise. So after people learn this stuff, they don't need, long, slow cardio. They don't even need interval training. I have one client who has done 0 cardio with me. All we have done is progressive movement and progressive resistance training. That's it. And he has probably the best results out of anybody I've trained. And so it's not about cardio and diet and so on and so forth. If you can change your body to function better, it's going to look better, regardless of what you do otherwise.
Right. There's the old design precept, form follows function.
Form follows function, baby.
Yep. Yeah. So on what we've been talking about, I'm really big about teaching people so they can learn progression and go very far with it to advancing. One thing you incorporate into every program you put together, whether individual clients or your online stuff, is you have these progressions built in, and you're about to come up with a new huge program that's been a lot of work. I've seen it from the sidelines. Can you tell us a little bit about this and how the progression's built in, and who is this right for?
Yeah, man. Oh, man, this is my baby, right? So about two and a half years ago, I kind of set out in my mind to create this system. And I've created a lot of programs based on my concepts of progressive movement and what I've learned from training over 500 people. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, okay, I wanted to create this, I wanted to create that. But the reality was I didn't have enough resources to be able to create the system. Like the one where I could just stand back and be like, this is what I want to teach everybody. You know what I mean? And so I didn't have the resources to do it. I wanted it to be high quality. I wanted it to be big. I wanted it to have a lot of content, but in a way that people could easily digest and use. And so I got partnered up with the Shapeshifter Media guys, who are some fantastic guys that produce really, really high quality fitness products. And we got on the phone and we started talking, and this project just swelled and swelled and swelled. And the whole time I was talking to these guys about it, I was like, I just want to make this the biggest, baddest ass thing anybody's ever seen. And so the way I like to describe the new project, CT50, is it's like 5 P90Xs in one, okay? And I know if you're listening to this call, you're probably like, P90X, this is, I'm hanging up now, right? But that's not what I'm talking about, okay? So one of the things that we talked about already on the call is people kind of believe they are who they are. And so when somebody watches a P90X program, or does any workout program for that matter, typically they're going to do one of two things. They're going to do like we already said, which is jump straight to the advanced level before they've built a foundation. And if they do that, you have greater risk for potential injury, and you're probably not going to get the results you want because you can't really bring the intensity unless you're biomechanically correct. Otherwise, that causes injury, right? The other side of this, Logan, is that some people will look at the beginner model and they'll marry themselves to the beginner model, right? They'll think that the beginner model is who they are, right? So they'll follow the beginner program, and then they'll rest for a week, and they'll follow the beginner program, and they'll rest. Everybody's had that experience where you go to the gym, and you see somebody who's been doing the same damn workout over and over again for 10 years, right? And you're like, there's no progression whatsoever. They don't add more weight. They don't add more reps. They probably go to the water fountain at the same time during their workout, right? Yeah. And so that's what happens. Those are two huge mistakes, is not building that strong foundation and going too advanced too quick. And then on the flip side, getting married to the idea of I am a beginner, I will never be able to do these advanced things, and just sticking to your beginner program for the rest of your life, right? And so both of these are huge mistakes. So with CT50, what we did is we created 10 workouts over 5 different levels. And I'm not talking about 2 workouts per level. I'm talking about 10 workouts per level. That's why it's called CT50, is 50 different workouts, okay? And the way the system works is this. If you're a beginner, you start with level 1. You do those 10 workouts in a series, either 3 days a week up to 5 days a week, and then you test yourself, and this is the part I'm really proud of. You test yourself once every 10 workouts against the challenge workout. So that would be CT10 if you were on level 1. And it's really simple. All you do is perform the exercises in the circuit, and we have follow-along videos. We have the manual and everything as well, and workout tracker sheets, the whole gig. All you do is count your reps for the whole workout all the way up. And Logan's done CT50 with me before. He knows how freaking hard that workout is. Yeah. It's such a tough workout. So all you do is you track your reps, and if you get to 400, you go to level 2, and if you don't get to 400 total reps, you stay at level 1, and you go back through the cycle again and retest in 10 more workouts. And so like I was trying to describe to Logan, it was like kind of like a video game in some ways. All you're trying to do is just beat your last score on that workout. And if you want to track your reps on every single workout, we have progressions how you can track your score on every single workout. So if you have to go back through a cycle, all you have to do is try to beat your score on that cycle. So the idea is just continual progression, like unstoppable progression. And each level becomes more complex. So the movement patterns get more complex. The loads stay the same, so you don't have to have a lot of equipment. So if you have like literally a dumbbell and a pair of rings or a pull-up bar, that's what we want you to have, right? And then the movements get more complex. And so it just takes you from literally like basic exercises, like we're talking about kneeling push-ups and deadlifts and body weight squats and body weight rows, to like explosive pull-ups, hanging leg raises, handstand push-ups, explosive lateral push-ups, one-arm snatches, double unders with a jump rope, like the whole gig. And the whole concept is as the workouts change, you change, form follows function. And so the system is really just laid out for people who want a cross-training format, but that's planned. because I hear muscle confusion thrown around a lot these days, and you and I both know that it's fun to do something different every day, but you don't really get the best results. There has to be some degree of planned cycling in there. Otherwise, you don't really get oftentimes people will not expose themselves to the things that they're bad at. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to have that continuous exposure to all of the foundational movement patterns so that way you get consistent results. And the system we created isn't about like, oh, hey, you should do CT50 and only CT50. Like, that's not the idea. The workouts are 9 to 20 minutes in length, so they're short. And so if you want to do some strength training beforehand and then just use CT50 as your high-intensity training format, that's fine with me. I don't got any problem with that. I think that's pretty much what I've been doing myself lately. And so it's really not trying to replace anything. It's really just trying to teach people a really logical progression so that you can use that progressive movement that we've talked about this entire program and apply that into a format where you can have like a logical progression of workouts and exercises. So I'm so freaking excited about this thing, dude. I've been working on this thing for like 3.5 months, and it's easily the biggest project I've ever done, and I just could not be more stoked about it finally coming to fruition because, like I said, this was like my dream, like my baby, and it's finally coming to reality.
Yeah, would you say this is for someone who, it could be beginner to fairly advanced level, but who really wants to get that foundation and really have something that they don't need to think a whole lot about, but will actually give them those key steps of progression and increases in movement quality that I'd say the majority of programs out there do not have?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the whole goal with this thing. Like we just talked about, like if somebody could do, one-legged squats and handstand push-ups and things like that, then, like obviously everybody knows that if somebody can do, let's say person A can do squats and bodyweight rows and push-ups, and they're okay at all of them. And then person B can do handstand push-ups and one-legged jump squats and double unders and pull-ups and leg raises. Like, there's no question, like, who's going to look better, right? Like, you can just remove diet, remove lifestyle factors. Like, the person who can do the more complex exercises is going to look better. There's no question about that. And so what we wanted to do was give people just the easy way to do it. Like we just talked about all these progressions. Well, basically what I did is I took every single progression that I had for dumbbells, pull-up bars, body weight, and I put them into this one system so that you can get a great workout in 20 minutes or less. And I really think people are actually going to follow along to this thing. That's the big thing about it is I look at like, P90X, sure, they sold like 1 million copies, right? But how many people have you met that have actually done it?
Well, yeah, a lot of people get injured with it, too.
Yeah, and a lot of people get injured with it, and it's just not, it doesn't make any damn
sense. They do it until that happens.
Yeah, they do it until they get injured, right? Yeah, another thing, too, is like that program asks for like six or 7 hours a week of your time, and I'm a busy dad. I run 3 businesses. I've got way too much crap going on to have to worry about spending an hour a day or even longer than that working out. I love working out, but as I grow older, I get less and less time to be able to do it. And so for me, if I can get out there in my garage 3 days a week and I might do like a lift or some harder bodyweight stuff, I might do a little handstand or a little one-arm chin work or some rope climbing or some weighted chins or something like that, and then I might do a CT-style workout. I mean, that's what I want to be. I want to do that so that when me and you, Logan, go to the park, I can still play. I can have a good time. That's one of the things we keep toying around with is the saying, be fit to play, right? It's not about becoming the world's strongest man with CT50. But if you follow those 50 workouts exactly as I laid them out, well, guess what? You will get to the point where you can do things that you thought were formerly impossible. I mean, I'm not shy. The CT50 workout, I'll just lay it out on the bag. It's a gnarly workout. It's 30 seconds of each exercise, no rest between stations, 1 minute rest between rounds for 4 rounds. You count your total reps. And those exercises are handstand push-ups, explosive or kipping style pull-ups, and we teach you a very good movement progression in that system so you don't injure your shoulders and you actually learn how to do them properly. Double unders, toes to bar, goblet jump squats, explosive lateral push-ups where it's almost like a clap push-up but your body's going from side to side, then one-arm snatches right and one-arm snatches left, and typically I tell people to use anywhere like a men between 35 and a 50-pound kettlebell or dumbbell, and then for women, usually between like a 15 and a 35-pound kettlebell or dumbbell. And you try that workout out, man. See if you can get 400 reps, and give me a call if you do, because it is brutal.
Yeah, now I'm recalling the whole thing. That was not fun. There's some surprises in there. How bad some of those things suck.
It's a 20-minute workout too. I mean, like really, like if you just followed your regular strength training program, because I know a lot of people who are listening to this are just really into strength training. Well, maybe you've kind of shot yourself in the foot on movement complexity. You're not doing as much as you like, or you haven't done as many advanced bodyweight exercises, or, I don't know, we shouldn't say advanced, but some of the more challenging bodyweight exercises, or your conditioning is just really not what you want it to be. Well, that's what the program is designed to do, is to kind of just, you can tack it onto the end, or you can use it as your standalone system if you want to, but I know a lot of you guys do a lot of strength training, so you can just tack it onto the end of your strength training, do 3 CT workouts a week, cycle through that 10 workouts, test yourself, count your reps, move on if you got 400, stay at the level if you didn't. It's that simple.
Cool. Well, any final things before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing I want to leave people with, is I don't care if you guys buy the system or not. It's my baby. A lot of people are going to get into it. I really don't care if you guys buy the system or not. What I want you to leave this call with is the understanding that we've just spent the last 30 minutes or so talking about movement progressions. And the one thing that I said in this call that is the most important is that I don't care where you end up. I don't care if you're doing freestanding handstand push-ups full range or if your best ever is going to be a legitimate real push-up. What I care about is that you keep moving forward. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really cannot emphasize that enough. And that's where I've made mistakes in my past, is where I just didn't focus on moving forward. And Logan knows me, I have ADD with training, which is why I love cross-training so much. But one of the things I really pride myself in is year to year, barring injuries, of course, because I've had a pretty bad knee injury in the last couple of years. But year to year, I always want to look back and say, okay, I can just do a little bit more than last year. I can do a few more push-ups. I set a new PR on pull-ups and weights or reps. Oh, I've got stronger in my abs, And I think that continuous moving forward, once you get that in your fitness, it kind of embodies you in your whole life. And it's just become this huge theme of mine. It's just keep moving forward. And so every year I want to look back and be like, okay, I look better naked. I perform better. I can do more cool skills and tasks. I have more work capacity, right? I've made more money this year. I live a better life, a healthier life. I want to look back every single year and just say I improved myself just a little bit on every little way. And that's what I want people to do, is just look at the spectrum of where you're at, where you could potentially be, and just make sure you don't slip backwards. Just keep moving forward.
Absolutely, and presuppose within that you're going to have to understand progression to be able to analyze that and have goals and everything. So a lot of cool things with that, and I wholeheartedly agree. So thank you very much, Tyler. Everyone be sure to head over to garagewarrior.com. Check out Tyler's website. He's got a lot of great information. We'll be having some more information on the CT50 program. If you want to check that out, absolutely, highly recommend it. So thank you very much, Tyler.
Sure thing, brother. Thanks for having me back on the call.
All right. Everyone have a good day, and we'll talk to you soon.